Evil Dead Rise is the 5th film in the Evil Dead franchise, and in my latest unpopular opinions video, I said that Scream is the best horror franchise of all time and it isn't even close. Well, given this installment, it's pretty fucking close. I've been a fan of Evil Dead for as long as I can remember. Evil Dead 2 is one of my favourite movies of all time, as is Army of Darkness. I think the 2013 remake is an underrated contemporary horror classic, and Sam Raimi has always been one of my favourite directors. The ideas that he builds are so rife with potential that when anybody uses them in their own way, it excites me, as was with the remake of the first Evil Dead, as was the case for Ash vs. the Evil Dead. Which brings us to Evil Dead Rise. I sadly didn't get to see this as quickly as I wanted, but I finally did 2 nights ago, and this shit is fire! But this video is going to include many spoilers for the film, so if you haven't seen it yet, I'd suggest clicking off and coming back when you have, or if you don't care, fuck it, who am I to tell you what to do? So this film starts off with a Raimi homage doing a travelling shot with the way the camera moves, and it's funny because they make use of a drone, and that's exactly how they would achieve this shot in the modern day. But when Raimi did it back in 1981, he would have had to manually haul these big cameras on bikes chasing Bruce Campbell. Or for some of the more impossible shots, he'd attach a camera to say a plank of wood and maneuver it that way. So not only is this opening shot a nice homage to the originator of the series with one of his signature techniques, it's also a display of how far we've come in filmmaking. And there's tons more homages and nods to earlier films too, the standouts being the use of the double barrel shotgun, a chainsaw, and Bruce Campbell even makes a cameo as one of the voices on the records that gets played. I love when new horror films within a series pay tribute to those that came before it, but it's important to do it in an honest and fairly subtle way. It's horrible when a movie constantly feels like it's winking at you like newer Star Wars films or something. There are some potential callbacks like the youngest sibling decapitating her doll. It could be a nod to the earlier films which have a theme of decapitation. And there was also this elevator shot that was a true in-your-face The Shining nod. But you know, as I said, it isn't all just callbacks, but one thing I'm glad to say has stuck around pretty consistently is the gore. This may even be the goriest in the franchise. There's some absolutely brutal moments, and it lets you know from the jump. In like the first 10 minutes, a girl gets her scalp ripped off. It's insane. And that is followed by an insanely good title drop. The whole opening is just crazy good. It itself is a tribute to the other set in place in a cabin in the woods, but I just wish they had used the original cabin. Maybe that would have been too on the nose, but I honestly think it would be worth it if it were just for the intro. Besides, it would be a good way to tie into the rest of the franchise and sort of build a universe. At least with the previous remake, just making some kind of continuity. Because they don't set the whole film there, they take the Scream 6 approach and bring the franchise to the city. Now yes, to a lesser degree, because the Evil Dead still needs to be claustrophobic in some capacity that Scream doesn't. But they managed to do that pretty well here. They trap them on like the 13th floor of an apartment complex and using the guise of an earthquake take out the elevator, the stairs, and since it's obviously having fucking apocalyptic rain, nobody can hear them scream outside. I wish they made some use of the other apartments, but overall the essentially 2 locations of the hallway in the apartment managed to keep the budget down whilst giving the whole film a trapped feel, which is what Evil Dead is all about. This is the first Lee Cronin movie I've seen, but I'm tempted to check others. His use of different techniques are very integral to giving this film its own identity 40 years into the franchise. He uses some deranged split diopter shots, which I usually hate, but I think they're wielded very well here and work towards giving the experience a really uncomfortable look. Also, using the peephole as its own fisheye lens is genius and a good constant motif, because a fisheye lens is supposed to make things look exaggerated, to distort the size and space of an image, and to apply that to the mother character is brilliant. Also, starting the film almost in medias res, but not making it obvious is super fun, so when it eventually loops back around to that moment where you realise it's about to be the intro, you get really giddy. Well, I did anyway. This film also found its own identity using the makeup and costuming. Now, as is typical with the franchise, especially with the Raimi trilogy, the makeup and practical effects are a staple. This film continues with that, pulling off some crazy shit whilst limiting the use of digital visual effects. The costuming and makeup, especially on the mother as soon as she turns Deadeye, is genuine Oscar-worthy stuff. So though it's a far stretch from the Raimi look, which is difficult to replicate anyway, plus Tom Sullivan is a special effects artist that is not easily followed, it looks great. But it isn't all incredible. I mean, they make people excessively dumb, even dumber than children realistically are. Like, nobody has any business fucking with that book. You would turn off those records immediately. They leave some questions pretty unanswered, like how did the book end up in that bank or that vault, quite obviously far away from where the events on the record take place. I was hoping they'd do a sort of Ash hint to say he took it there after the events of his movies or whatever, but nah. The people in the film are constantly splitting up, and I just despise this Scooby-Doo bullshit in horror movies. If the horror film is based in the modern day, we have to assume that people have evolved mentally to understanding that sticking together is the best option for survival, but writers keep playing on these fucking tropes, which is a bit annoying. I mean, they literally leave the youngest by herself. She's like 6, what the fuck are you doing? And then that dumbass kid nearly lets the mom in because nobody's watching her. Man, I was in a screen with very little people because I go on offbeat times, but this film scared a lot of people out, so in the end it was just me in there, which was great because I was able to just yell at the screen when characters were being fucking stupid. But to be fair, even when the characters are smart, it doesn't matter. Like, one of the kids ties up a Deadeye in a sheet with rope, and then in the next scene, they're just out of it without any explanation. We didn't even see it happen. The kid did a smart. Give him a pass, for fuck's sake. And in typical horror fashion, there is no way to explain the events of this film rationally to any police officer, so the fates of the characters is left unknown, which is smart because if it were shown to us, it would probably be really bleak and they would be arrested or put up for adoption, something. It just wouldn't be good at all to see and not satisfying in the slightest. But overall, I'm being slightly cruel. Like I said, this film scared nearly everyone out of my showing. There was a moment where there was one particular scare and this big beefy guy audibly said, "Nope," and left, and it was the funniest fucking shit I've ever experienced in a cinema showing ever. The moment where the mother goes into the vents was incredibly tense and even had me having my skin crawl just a little bit. I was genuinely frightened, and that doesn't happen very often in horror films. The film also utilizes the actual Book of the Dead and its drawings very well, which previous films haven't done as much. And though the teenage Deadeye is infinitely less scary than the mother, mostly due to the performance given by Alyssa Sutherland, who is fantastic, when the Deadites all form into one big monstrosity, it is incredibly fun. I'd say this is the most gory and possibly the most quote-unquote scariest film in the franchise, and for that I've got to give it an 8 out of 10. To reinvent ideas this far into a franchise and not run out of clever ways to present them or new ways to scare the audience is very impressive. Franchises like Halloween and Friday the 13th never managed to actually upkeep the quality of the franchise, sometimes taking immediate dips, but especially those two had new installments last year and it's been very shaky for them in terms of reviews and box office success. But Evil Dead Rise and Scream 6 have been the latest in their franchise and they've brought their respective series to the modern age without compromising what it's always been about, whilst adding in new techniques and storytelling devices to keep it refreshing to audiences. It's one thing to satisfy the older fans of the franchise who will most likely shovel in any old shit you give them, but to entice a new audience to existing franchises without giving them this pressure of needing prior knowledge is very smart and difficult. With the success this film is having monetarily and in the reviews, I can safely say it succeeded at doing it all. There's a lot for pre-existing fans, but there's a film here that works exclusively on its own, which is vital to maintaining a franchise this long. So with that said, have you seen Evil Dead Rise? If so, let me know what you thought of it, let me know what you thought of this video. I read every single comment and reply to as many as possible, and whether it's one from the second best horror franchise of all time, or maybe even the best horror franchise or not, as always, keep watching movies.